It was a July morning in Washington state, and the day began quietly. The sun had just started breaking through the dense pine trees on the slopes of the Cascade Mountains. Birds sang softly in the stillness, and a gentle breeze rustled the treetops, carrying the scent of fresh pine and damp earth. Immersed in this idyllic setting was a young couple, Michael and Sarah. They weren't professional hikers, but this trip had been their dream for weeks. A weekend in the fresh air, camping in the forest, a night under the stars, everything they needed to escape the noise of city life. Michael, 28, an engineer from Seattle, had always been passionate about nature. Sarah, 26, worked as a photographer and had a weakness for breathtaking landscapes. They had met in college and their bond seemed unbreakable. Preparing for this trip had taken weeks, packing backpacks, checking gear, buying maps, and planning routes. Sarah photographed everything, from new hiking boots to the thermos they would use to carry tea. They left early in the morning while the city still slept and the roads were empty. Music played softly as they laughed, talking about the plans for the weekend. Along the way, they stopped occasionally to capture scenic views, rushing rivers, waterfalls, towering evergreens. Everything seemed perfect. But when they finally reached the foot of the mountains, the atmosphere shifted. The forest grew denser, and the trail became narrow and rocky. Sunlight filtered through only in patches, leaving shadows that moved with every step. Locals they met, fishermen and hikers, warned them about recent heavy rains and dangerous spots along the trail. Michael laughed off the warnings. "It's just the forest. We'll be fine. We're careful." Sarah nodded, but a faint sense of unease lingered. They arrived at a cozy clearing by a small stream and decided to set up camp. Michael pitched the tent while Sarah spread out their gear, taking photos of every detail. Everything appeared ordinary and peaceful. The wind played with the leaves, the stream gurgled quietly, and it seemed the world was holding its breath, ready to receive their story. However, the forest always has something unpredictable. Sarah felt a shiver run through her hand, even though the sun still illuminated the clearing. She lifted her camera again, trying to focus on photographing, but her gaze accidentally fell on a dark space between the trees that seemed to shift. Michael noticed her look and grinned, just the light and shadows playing tricks. Yet the feeling of unease remained. They had dinner, laughed over small mishaps, took photos, and joked around. Everything seemed like a normal camping night. And yet, as the sun began to set and darkness enveloped the forest, the shadows stretched longer and the sounds grew louder. Sarah could hear rustling beyond the reach of her flashlight, but Michael gave her a reassuring nudge. "Don't worry, it's just the forest coming alive." They went to sleep, unaware that this night would mark the beginning of an event that would forever change the lives of their loved ones. None of them knew that the next morning they would no longer be the same people they had been. Their story was just beginning, a story of disappearance that would be difficult to explain, and secrets that would wait years to be revealed. The morning after setting up camp, the forest was alive with sounds. Birds chirped more loudly, the stream gurgled with renewed energy after the night's rain, and the sun cast a soft golden glow through the thick canopy. Michael and Sarah woke up to the smell of damp earth and pine, both eager to explore the trails they had come so far to see. They brewed coffee over a small portable stove, laughing as they spilled a few drops, and ate a simple breakfast of granola and fruit. It was routine, comfortable, yet beneath it, a subtle tension lingered. Their plan was straightforward: follow a trail that wound through the denser parts of the forest, eventually leading to a lookout point with a panoramic view of the valley. Michael checked his compass and map, feeling confident. "We'll be there by noon," he said, smiling at Sarah. She adjusted the strap of her camera bag, capturing the way sunlight filtered through the tall pines, shadows dancing along the forest floor. She felt a thrill of excitement, This was exactly why she loved the outdoors. Yet something deep inside made her hesitate before stepping onto the trail. The forest seemed normal at first. Birds, squirrels, the occasional rustle of leaves. But as they ventured deeper, the undergrowth thickened, and the trees towered higher, blocking more sunlight. The air was cooler, damp, and smelled faintly of moss and decaying leaves. Each step forward made the trail narrower, the footing uneven and slippery from the previous night's rain. Michael's confidence never wavered, but Sarah noticed small oddities. Broken branches arranged strangely, patches of mud that looked like footprints, but too scattered, too shallow to be human. By midday, they had reached a clearing where the trail split into two narrow paths. Michael studied the map. Either way, we'll reach the ridge eventually. Let's take the right path. Looks less overgrown. Sarah nodded, but she hesitated for just a moment, glancing toward the left path where shadows seemed darker, almost moving. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. Michael laughed. "Positive. Come on, don't worry so much." Yet the unease lingered. As they continued, subtle signs of disturbance appeared more frequently. Rocks that didn't match the terrain, patches of flattened grass, and the eerie sound of something rustling just beyond the edge of sight. Sarah tried to brush it off, focusing on taking photos. "It's probably just an animal," she whispered to herself. Michael, sensing her tension, held her hand briefly. "We've got this. Nothing's going to happen." By late afternoon, the sky had begun to darken with approaching clouds, hinting at a sudden storm. They debated whether to turn back, but their desire to reach the lookout point pushed them forward. The wind picked up, carrying a strange chill that crawled under their jackets. Sarah pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, while Michael adjusted his backpack and led the way. Something about the forest now felt watching. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Sarah caught a glimpse of a shadow moving between the trees. She froze. Michael noticed her hesitation. "What is it?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. It just moved. Something out there." Michael squinted into the dim light. "Probably a deer," he said, though even he sounded uncertain. The forest had become quieter, almost too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. They decided to press on, but every step now carried a weight of tension. The storm began in earnest. Wind howled, rain lashed against their jackets, and lightning split the sky. Visibility dropped, and the trail became treacherous. They huddled together, trying to navigate through the dense undergrowth, slipping occasionally on wet rocks. Their laughter and casual chatter from the morning were long gone. By the time they found a small natural shelter formed by fallen logs and rocks, the storm was relentless. They crouched beneath it, drenched and shivering. Sarah's camera had fogged over, her hands trembling as she tried to keep it safe. "We should probably head back once this dies down," she said. Michael nodded, but the idea of retracing their steps in the dark, stormy forest filled him with unease. As night began to fall, the storm eased slightly, but the forest was no longer inviting. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves sounded amplified in the dark. Michael and Sarah decided to return to their camp, hoping to reach it before the forest swallowed them completely. Yet deep inside, they both felt the first real chill of fear, a premonition that their ordinary adventure was about to become something they could never have imagined. By the time Michael and Sarah reached a narrow bend in the trail, the forest had taken on a completely different personality. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the path, the thick canopy blocking nearly all sunlight, and the distant sounds of birds and insects seemed muted, replaced by an almost eerie silence. Every step they took sounded louder than it should, echoing against unseen trunks and rocks. Sarah's stomach twisted. She had been uneasy before, but now her anxiety was no longer subtle. It had grown into a gnawing fear. "Maybe we should just wait here until the rain stops," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling slightly. Michael shook his head. No, we can make it. We just have to follow the path carefully. But even he hesitated for the first time. Something about the way the forest pressed in on them felt wrong. As they continued, small but strange occurrences began to escalate. A sudden crack of a branch behind them made them both spin around, heart racing. There was no one there. A rustle in the bushes, closer than before, startled Sarah into dropping her camera. She bent to pick it up, but in that instant, Michael noticed something odd. Footprints in the mud that didn't match their own, too deep and large to be a deer, yet too random to belong to another hiker. "Did you see that?" Michael whispered, pointing at the prints. Sarah nodded, swallowing nervously. "It doesn't make sense. Who's out here?" They called out softly. "Hello? Anyone?" Only the wind answered, carrying a faint, distant sound that neither could identify. It wasn't the forest. This was something else. The trail twisted sharply, leading them to a small stream. The water was fast and dark, reflecting the overcast sky. Michael tried to keep his footing on the slick rocks, but Sarah slipped slightly, catching herself on a branch. Their nerves were taut, every muscle on edge. Something about the forest now felt deliberate, as if it were watching them. Then came the sound, a low, almost human-like groan echoing through the trees. They froze. Sarah's breath caught. "Did you hear that?" Michael nodded, too shocked to speak. The sound came again, slightly closer, and both of them instinctively pressed themselves against the closest trees. They strained their eyes in the dim light, but the dense foliage hid anything beyond shadows. For the next hour, they attempted to retrace their steps to the main trail, but the forest seemed to twist and shift. What had been familiar now felt alien. Every landmark they thought they recognized was gone or subtly altered. Michael consulted the map and compass repeatedly, but something didn't add up. The path seemed to loop back on itself, confusing even their careful planning. As darkness fell, panic began to creep in. The couple realized they might not make it back to their camp before nightfall. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the forest in stark, unnatural detail. Broken branches, trees that seemed oddly bent, and patches of mud disturbed as if something had moved through it. Every flash revealed glimpses of shapes that disappeared the moment the light faded. Sarah clung to Michael's arm. "We need to find shelter now," she whispered. They stumbled upon a small hollow beneath an uprooted tree. It was cramped and damp, but it would have to do. They huddled together, drenched and shivering, trying to calm their racing hearts. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched her camera. Michael whispered reassurances, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Hours passed. The forest outside seemed alive with movement, branches snapping in the distance, leaves rustling as if something large was moving just beyond their sight. They tried to sleep, but fear and adrenaline kept them alert. Every noise, no matter how small, triggered a startled response. Somewhere deep in the forest, the groaning sound returned. This time it was unmistakable, closer than ever. Sarah's eyes widened in terror. Michael looked around desperately, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing, only the oppressive darkness and the eerie silence that followed each sound. For the first time, they understood that the forest was no longer just a backdrop for their adventure. It had become an entity of its own, hostile, watchful, and potentially deadly. As the night deepened, the couple held each other tightly, waiting, listening. The wind carried strange, muffled noises, and the forest seemed to close in. Neither of them spoke anymore. Words had lost their meaning. Something was out there, moving silently, and for the first time in their lives, Michael and Sarah realized that escaping this forest might not be as simple as following the trail. And somewhere beyond the trees, unseen but palpable, the first truly dangerous presence had made itself known. The storm had eased, but the forest remained a tangled maze of shadows and uncertainty. Michael and Sarah cautiously left the hollow beneath the uprooted tree, each step measured, every sound amplified by the stillness. Their footsteps were swallowed by the thick carpet of pine needles and wet leaves. A lingering unease pressed down on them with every movement. They reached a fork in the trail, one path leading uphill toward a ridge, and the other descending toward the stream near their campsite. Michael checked the compass, trying to make sense of the confusing layout. "The ridge. It's just a little farther. We can make it before dark," he said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. Sarah nodded, but her hands trembled as she gripped her camera. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if the forest itself was alive. As they ascended, Sarah noticed something odd, a thin ribbon of fabric caught on a branch, fluttering unnaturally in the faint breeze. She reached out, touched it, and instantly recoiled. The fabric was damp and smelled faintly of something metallic. "Michael, this doesn't belong here," she whispered. He looked confused. Maybe someone lost it, hiker or camper. But his voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the trees. Michael spun around, heart hammering. There was nothing, only shadows shifting. Sarah's breath quickened. "It's following us," she said, more to herself than to him. He tried to reassure her. "It's the storm, branches falling. Nothing more." But even he couldn't ignore the hair standing on his neck. They pressed on, determined to reach the ridge, but the forest was becoming hostile. The trail was slick, roots jutting out like teeth, and mud clung to their boots. Every step seemed to echo louder than it should, and every small movement in the undergrowth caught their attention. A rustle to the left, a snap of a twig. Michael's head turned instinctively, but no one was there. Then it happened. A scream, sharp, high-pitched, almost unearthly. It came from a few meters ahead, muffled but unmistakable. Sarah froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, voice trembling. Michael swallowed hard. "It's probably an animal," he said, but the uncertainty in his own voice betrayed him. The scream echoed again, closer this time, and the forest seemed to press in, suffocating them with its intensity. They cautiously moved toward the sound, hearts pounding. The forest opened up slightly into a small clearing, but it was empty. Nothing moved except for the trees swaying in the wind. Sarah's hands shook as she raised the camera to her eye, trying to capture evidence. That's when she saw it, a shadow moving just beyond the trees, darker than the night around it, disappearing almost instantly. Michael grabbed her arm. "We need to go back," he said firmly. But the trail they had followed seemed altered, as if the forest had shifted overnight. Every familiar landmark was gone, replaced by an alien, menacing terrain. Panic began to set in. They realized they might not find their way back to the campsite, not in the dark, not in this storm-battered forest. As they debated which way to go, the first real accident occurred. Michael slipped on a wet root, falling hard onto the muddy ground. Sarah screamed, rushing to his side. His ankle twisted unnaturally, and pain shot through his leg. "I can't walk properly," he groaned. The realization hit them like a wave. They were vulnerable, exposed, and alone in an unforgiving wilderness. They tried to improvise using sticks as makeshift supports, but progress was painfully slow. Darkness was settling quickly, and the temperature began to drop. The wind carried strange, distant sounds, groans, whispers, and the faint shuffle of movement just out of sight. Every sense screamed danger. The forest was no longer a backdrop for adventure. It had become a predator, and they were trapped in its jaws. By nightfall, the couple found a small, precarious rock overhang to shelter under. They huddled together, shivering, unable to speak. The forest around them pulsed with unseen motion, a predator stalking them in silence. Sarah's camera, now fogged and dripping with rain, felt like the only connection to reality. Michael wrapped his jacket around her, whispering reassurances that he didn't believe himself. Neither could sleep. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves made them jump. Somewhere deeper in the forest, the presence that had been hinted at earlier made itself undeniable. Its attention had turned toward them. And in that moment, Michael and Sarah understood. The forest had become more than just wild. It had become a trap, and the first incident was only the beginning. Night had fully fallen, and the forest had transformed into a maze of shadows and shapes, every sound amplified, every movement seemingly deliberate. Michael and Sarah huddled under the small rock overhang, their bodies pressed together for warmth, their hearts pounding in unison. The storm had passed, but a thick mist rolled through the trees, obscuring visibility and swallowing the trail they had struggled to follow earlier. Michael tried to keep his ankles steady, using a stick for support, but each movement sent sharp pain up his leg. "We need to get back to camp," he whispered, voice strained with urgency. Sarah nodded, but fear had paralyzed her. Every rustle, every whisper of wind sounded like footsteps moving closer. Something in the darkness was watching, patient and silent. They carefully moved along the narrow trail, one cautious step at a time. The mist wrapped around them like a shroud, and the familiar sounds of the forest now seemed distorted, branches cracking in unnatural patterns, shadows dancing at the edge of their vision. Sarah clutched her camera tightly, desperate to document their path, but the lens fogged over almost immediately. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the darkness, sending both of them freezing. Michael squinted, trying to locate the source. Nothing was visible. The forest had grown unnaturally quiet for a moment, and then the growl came again, closer, deeper, more menacing. Panic surged. "We need to run," Michael hissed, gripping Sarah's hand. As they ran, their flashlight beam cut through the fog, illuminating twisted roots and uneven terrain. Michael stumbled, losing balance on the slick mud. Sarah lunged to catch him, and in that instant a shadow darted from the trees. She screamed, and Michael turned toward her. But Sarah was gone. For a moment, disbelief paralyzed him. He called her name, voice cracking. Only the echo of his own voice returned. Panic replaced shock, and he ran back and forth, scanning the darkness. Footprints, his and hers, were visible in the mud, but then a set of prints veered sharply into the thick forest, leading away from the trail. Michael followed, limping and desperate, heart hammering, but the deeper he went, the more disoriented he became. The mist thickened, swallowing the trail. Every sound was magnified, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and a faint, almost human whisper that seemed to circle them. Michael's shouts became frantic cries for help, echoing through the trees. But Sarah's voice never came back. Hours seemed to pass in an endless loop. The forest twisted, paths that should have led back to camp now led only deeper into darkness. Michael's flashlight flickered, and the wind howled, carrying strange, distorted sounds. Exhaustion and fear clouded his mind. Every instinct screamed danger, every fiber of his being screamed to flee, yet he could find no sign of Sarah. By the first light of dawn, Michael stumbled back to the clearing near their original campsite. The tent was gone. Their belongings were scattered, some partially buried in mud, others left untouched. The camera lay face down, lens cracked, capturing nothing but distorted images of the night. Panic, disbelief, and terror consumed him. Sarah was nowhere to be found. Search parties were called, reports were filed, and local authorities scoured the area. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, yet Michael's words were all anyone had. She was right there, and then she vanished. The forest, seemingly innocent and serene in daylight, had swallowed her without a trace. Years later, a hiker discovered something unusual deep within the forest. An old piece of Sarah's clothing, partially decomposed, pinned by a branch in a location impossible to reach by accident. It was a silent, haunting clue. The forest held its secrets close, revealing only fragments, teasing the truth, but never giving closure. Michael's life would never be the same. The disappearance of Sarah remained a haunting enigma, a story whispered among locals and thrill-seekers, a chilling reminder that the wilderness holds dangers far beyond human comprehension. And somewhere, deep in the Cascade Mountains, the forest watched and waited, patient and silent, for the next story to unfold. The morning after Sarah's disappearance, Michael was still in shock. The sun rose over the Cascade Mountains, casting long shadows across the forest floor, but it did nothing to calm the panic gnawing at him. He retraced their steps in a daze, calling her name until his voice was hoarse. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call seemed like it could be her, but nothing appeared. The forest, now peaceful in daylight, held no trace of what had happened the night before. After several hours of futile searching, Michael returned to the nearest ranger station. His face was pale, clothes muddy and torn, eyes wide with fear. My girlfriend," he stammered. "She's gone. She was right there, and then she vanished." The rangers exchanged worried glances, taking down his account carefully. Search and rescue teams were mobilized immediately. Volunteers, equipped with flashlights, ropes, and GPS devices, scoured the forest. Helicopters hovered overhead, their spotlights cutting through the dense canopy. The search covered every inch of the trail, every bend in the stream, and every hidden clearing. Dogs were brought in, trained to pick up human scent, but even they returned confused, barking at nothing and refusing to follow a trail. The authorities interviewed Michael multiple times, trying to piece together the last moments before Sarah vanished. He described the shadow, the scream, the fog, and the sudden feeling that the forest itself was watching. Most investigators were skeptical. "It's a dense forest," one ranger said gently. "People get lost here all the time. The mist, the terrain. It's easy to become disoriented." Michael wanted to believe that, but the memory of the growl, the unnatural movement in the shadows, and the low, haunting whispers from the night made him doubt any ordinary explanation. Local news picked up the story. Headlines read, "Couple on weekend hike in Washington mountains, ends in mystery," and "Search continues for missing woman in Cascade forests." The community was shocked. Sarah was known for her vibrant energy, her love of photography, and her adventurous spirit. Nobody could imagine her disappearing without a trace. Days passed. Helicopters and drones scanned from above. Volunteers searched in teams along every trail and creek, and forensic experts examined the forest floor for clues. A few personal items were found: Michael's hiking boots, a broken branch, and a small piece of Sarah's scarf tangled in a bush, but no sign of her. The items seemed almost deliberately left, as if the forest itself were taunting the searchers. Michael, desperate and guilt-ridden, returned to the forest daily, often ignoring warnings from authorities. Each step brought a mix of hope and dread. He called out to Sarah, listened for her familiar voice, and retraced every movement from the night before. Sometimes he thought he saw a glimpse of her in the distance, a figure moving between the trees, but when he ran toward it, there was nothing. Weeks turned into months. The search teams gradually scaled back, leaving behind only a few dedicated volunteers, and Michael, whose obsession had grown unbearable. The forest remained silent, yet not peaceful. Strange occurrences were reported by hikers, shadows moving in unnatural ways, unexplainable sounds, fleeting glimpses of a figure that disappeared when approached. Rumors began to circulate. Some say she's still in the forest, wandering. Years later, the mystery would become a story told around campfires and in local cafes. Articles, podcasts, and documentaries would explore the case, always ending with the same chilling questions. What really happened to Sarah? Was it an accident, a human predator, or something else entirely? And why did the forest, which had once seemed welcoming and serene, transform into an unrelenting trap that swallowed her whole? Michael never gave up hope. He continued visiting the forest, speaking to hikers, leaving markers, and documenting everything. But deep in his heart, he knew that some answers might never come. The forest had its secrets, and it kept them jealously, revealing only fragments, enough to haunt and intrigue, but never enough to satisfy the search for truth. It had been 4 years since Sarah disappeared. Michael had aged noticeably, his hair slightly grayer, eyes shadowed by years of sleepless nights, haunted by memories of that night in the forest. The Cascade Mountains remained serene in daylight, almost mocking in their beauty. But he could never look at them the same way again. The trees, the trails, the streams, they were no longer just nature. They were a maze that had swallowed his love, leaving only unanswered questions. The news of a discovery spread quickly among locals and hikers. A hiker had stumbled upon a fragment of Sarah's belongings deep within the forest, in a place no one should have reached by accident. A small scarf, partially decomposed and pinned under a branch. The discovery was chilling, almost ritualistic. Authorities returned, combing through the area with renewed urgency. Michael arrived immediately, heart pounding, hope and dread entwined. The investigation team carefully documented the site. The scarf was examined for DNA, fibers, and anything that could offer a clue. The findings were inconclusive. It seemed she had been there, but nothing else. No footprints leading away, no sign of a struggle, nothing that could explain her disappearance. The forest had claimed her presence and then erased all trace of movement. Michael returned to the clearing where the scarf had been found. He traced the path with painstaking care, noticing small details overlooked before. Broken branches arranged in odd patterns, patches of flattened grass, subtle indentations in the soil that suggested movement, deliberate, calculated. His mind raced with possibilities. Had someone hidden her there, or had the forest itself, in some unimaginable way, been responsible? Over the following weeks, new reports surfaced from hikers and campers. Strange sounds were reported deep in the woods, groaning, whispers, movement that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Some spoke of fleeting shadows, figures glimpsed at the edge of sight, always just beyond reach. The forest seemed alive, as if guarding a secret it had never intended to reveal. Michael, now obsessed with understanding what had happened, began documenting everything, every report, every sound, every unusual sighting. He connected with other families who had experienced mysterious disappearances in the same region. Patterns emerged: the dense forest, the mist, the secluded trails. Something about the wilderness created an environment where people vanished without a trace, leaving only whispers and fragments. Despite the passage of time, Michael refused to give up hope entirely. Every new clue, however small, reignited a fragile optimism. He returned repeatedly to the forest, retracing the steps of that fateful night, examining areas where shadows had seemed to move, where sounds had emerged inexplicably. Each visit was a mix of dread and anticipation, a confrontation with the unknown that had haunted him for years. Local authorities, though skeptical, allowed the investigations to continue. Documentaries were made, news reports revisited, podcasts recounted the story in chilling detail. The forest, with its dense canopy and hidden creeks, became a symbol of mystery and fear. Hikers were warned, and the case entered the annals of unexplained disappearances. Yet even with all the attention, the truth remained elusive. 4 years later, a new breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker exploring an isolated ridge noticed something embedded in the moss and roots, a small, weathered journal. Flipping through the pages, investigators realized it belonged to Sarah. Its entries stopped abruptly the night she vanished, but there were notes detailing odd sensations, shadows that seemed to move, whispers in the dark. The journal hinted at fear beyond the ordinary, an intuition that something unnatural was present. Michael held the journal in his hands, tears streaming down his face. It confirmed that she had been there, alive and aware of the growing danger, yet offered no explanation for her disappearance. The forest had whispered, it had observed, and it had left only fragments. The story was far from over, but the discoveries, small as they were, confirmed one chilling reality. Some truths could only be glimpsed, never fully known. Following the discovery of Sarah's journal, Michael became obsessed with piecing together the events of that night. Each page contained small, eerie details, shadows that moved against the wind, unexplainable noises, and an overwhelming sense that the forest itself was alive and watching. Investigators who reviewed the journal noted that her final entries were filled with growing fear, as if she had sensed something stalking her, something beyond human comprehension. Determined to understand, Michael returned to the forest with a team of local trackers and forensic experts. They retraced the original path, revisiting every clearing, stream, and ridge he and Sarah had passed. At first, the forest seemed calm, almost welcoming, but the deeper they went, the more unsettling it became. Branches bent unnaturally, patches of moss were flattened in precise geometric patterns, and footprints appeared in the mud that didn't match any known animal. Hours into the search, they found the first truly shocking evidence: a small pile of personal belongings, carefully arranged in a circle. Sarah's camera, now heavily decayed, lay in the center. Around it were pieces of her clothing, leaves, and broken branches. The arrangement was deliberate, ritualistic even, suggesting a presence that was intelligent, patient, and calculating. Everyone on the team felt a cold chill. Something about the display seemed almost alive, as if it had been waiting for them to find it. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, barely audible over the wind, they grew louder as the team approached the site. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakably warning, or perhaps mockery. Some team members reported hearing footsteps circling behind them, only to find nothing when they turned. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, moving against the light, disappearing and reappearing in impossible ways. Michael found a second journal, hidden beneath a fallen tree. Its pages were fragmented, waterlogged, but it clearly belonged to Sarah. This journal contained hurried sketches of the forest, strange symbols, and notes describing an overwhelming sense of being followed. One entry stood out. "It knows me. I am being watched. I cannot see it, but I feel it moving around me." The handwriting became increasingly erratic toward the end, capturing her terror in every stroke. The team debated what they had uncovered. Was this the work of a person, some disturbed individual who had remained in the forest, or something far more inexplicable? Scientists examined the soil, finding subtle depressions and impressions in impossible arrangements. Wildlife behavior seemed abnormal. Birds avoided certain clearings, and the forest appeared eerily silent in spots where life should have thrived. As the day turned to evening, the team realized they had ventured farther than intended. The forest now felt like a labyrinth. Familiar trails were gone, replaced by dense undergrowth and misleading paths. The atmosphere was oppressive, charged with a tension that set every nerve on edge. Michael's thoughts returned to that fateful night, replaying Sarah's screams, the growls, and the shadows. He understood now. Something beyond human understanding had claimed her, and it still lingered. Before leaving the forest, the team set up cameras and sensors to monitor the area overnight. They captured fleeting images of indistinct shapes, movements too fast and precise to be human or animal. Shadows stretched and contracted in unnatural ways. Faint, untraceable sounds were recorded, low hums, groans, whispers. The forest had revealed fragments of its secret, but not the full truth. Michael left the forest that evening with a heavy heart. He had new evidence, but with it came a terrifying realization. Some mysteries were not meant to be solved. The forest had taken Sarah, left only clues, and continued to guard its secrets. The discoveries were horrifying, but they confirmed the unsettling reality. The wilderness could be both beautiful and deadly, alive with intelligence and intent beyond human comprehension. The chilling story of Sarah's disappearance spread further, gaining attention worldwide. Her journals, the arranged belongings, and the recordings became central pieces of documentaries and online discussions. Yet, despite years of investigation and growing evidence, the forest had only revealed fragments, never the full truth, leaving Michael, authorities, and anyone who learned the story with a lingering, terrifying question. What truly resides in the heart of the Cascade Mountains? Months had passed since the discoveries in the forest. Michael's life had narrowed to a singular focus, uncovering the truth behind Sarah's disappearance. Friends drifted away, and work became a distant memory. He spent days analyzing the journals, photos, and footage collected by the search team. Every detail mattered, but the more he looked, the more fragmented and incomprehensible it became. Michael returned to the forest alone, determined to confront the heart of the mystery. The Cascade Mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their peaks veiled in mist. The forest seemed to recognize him. Shadows moved in sync with his steps, subtle whispers echoed through the trees, and branches bent in ways that suggested intention. A creeping realization took hold. The forest was not just a setting, it was a living entity, intelligent and aware. As he navigated the dense undergrowth, familiar landmarks warped and twisted. Paths he thought he knew were gone, replaced by a labyrinth of underbrush and moss-covered rocks. The sun barely penetrated the canopy, casting eerie light on the forest floor. Every sound, an animal, the wind, a distant creak, felt amplified, charged with menace. Michael's anxiety climbed with every step. He reached the clearing where Sarah's belongings had been found. The arranged items were gone, but the aura of something unseen remained. Michael began speaking aloud, calling her name, pleading for any sign. The wind responded with whispers, indistinct but chillingly familiar. Shadows shifted in unnatural ways, forming shapes that almost resembled a human figure. His heart raced. Could it be her, or was it something else, something malevolent that had claimed her? Hours passed as he wandered deeper. The forest seemed alive, each tree, root, and shadow attuned to his movements. He began to question his own senses. Sounds of footsteps followed him, then disappeared. Shapes flickered in the corner of his vision, vanishing when he turned. The journal entries from Sarah's last days flashed in his mind. "It knows me. I am being watched." Each word echoed, reinforcing the terrifying possibility that she had sensed this presence too, perhaps even seen it. Exhaustion set in, and Michael collapsed near a small stream. The water reflected his own face, pale and gaunt, and for a moment he saw more. Glimpses of Sarah in the reflection, fleeting and distorted. Was it a hallucination, or was the forest showing him fragments of reality he couldn't fully comprehend? The whispers grew louder, now forming near words. "Why are you here? Leave! Leave!" Panic surged. He staggered to his feet, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to flee. Yet something compelled him to press on. He ventured farther than ever before, reaching a part of the forest previously untouched by search teams. Here, the atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with an almost tangible presence. The air vibrated with faint sounds, groans, whispers, the subtle shifting of unseen forms. Michael felt eyes on him, weightless yet heavy, observing every motion. Suddenly, the forest seemed to respond directly to him. A branch snapped sharply, leaves rustled violently, and a shadow moved across the ground in front of him. It was fast, precise, and impossibly silent. Michael stumbled back, tripping over roots, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Then came the unmistakable sound of breathing. Not his own, not hers, but something else entirely. In a moment of clarity, terror and despair collided. Michael realized the forest had never been neutral. It had claimed Sarah, and now it had him in its gaze. He screamed her name, and the sound was swallowed by the dense canopy, returned only as faint, mocking echoes. The forest was alive, patient, and inescapable. Hours blurred. Michael's sense of time disintegrated. Shadows seemed to merge with the mist, shapes became indistinguishable from reality, and whispers transformed into near-constant voices circling his mind. Exhausted and broken, he found himself back at the edge of the clearing, dazed, the forest closing in. For the first time, he understood the unthinkable. Some truths were beyond comprehension, and some forces, whatever had claimed Sarah, were beyond human control. Michael's sanity hung by a thread. The forest had revealed fragments of its truth, but it offered no closure, only terror. He realized that confronting it directly may have been a mistake, that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. Yet, even in despair, he could not turn away. The memory of Sarah and the need to understand what had happened kept him tethered to this living, breathing labyrinth. Dawn broke over the Cascade Mountains, casting a pale light on the dense forest that had consumed so many lives and memories. Michael remained at the edge of the clearing, exhausted, broken, and haunted by the events of the past years. The forest, now quiet in the morning light, seemed deceptively peaceful. Yet, beneath the stillness, the presence that had taken Sarah, and had long observed him, remained, patient and unseen. Michael retraced his steps slowly, noting every detail with trembling hands. Broken branches, flattened grass, subtle indentations in the soil, all were silent witnesses to events he could barely comprehend. He had come to understand one undeniable truth. The forest was not merely a backdrop for human activity. It was an entity, a conscious force, operating on a scale beyond human understanding. Its actions were deliberate, precise, and untraceable. The scattered belongings of Sarah still haunted him. The journals, partially decayed and waterlogged, contained glimpses of her terror and intuition, yet offered no clear answers. Her final notes hinted at an intelligence, a presence that watched, influenced, and ultimately claimed her. Michael had pieced together fragments of the night, but each discovery only deepened the mystery. The forest had taken her, leaving him with evidence, whispers, and shadows, but no closure. Determined to preserve what little was known, Michael began documenting everything meticulously. Maps, photographs, journal entries, and recordings were compiled into a detailed chronicle. He worked tirelessly, hoping that his records might prevent future tragedies. He also contacted local authorities, hikers, and researchers, sharing the story, the evidence, and the patterns he had observed. Even with these efforts, the forest remained a puzzle. Investigators who attempted to retrace the steps reported unsettling experiences. Shadows moving against the light, inexplicable noises, fleeting glimpses of figures, and an overwhelming sensation of being watched. The forest seemed to adapt to human presence, revealing fragments while keeping its core secret hidden. Years passed. Michael grew older, but his obsession never waned. He continued to explore, document, and warn others, driven by a mix of grief, hope, and compulsion. The story of Sarah became a cautionary tale for hikers, adventurers, and thrill-seekers. Yet for Michael, it was deeply personal, a constant reminder of loss, love, and the incomprehensible power of nature. In the end, the forest remained enigmatic. Some fragments of truth had been uncovered, but the ultimate reality was never revealed. Shadows moved in ways that defied explanation. Sounds echoed without source. And the place that had swallowed Sarah, that had reshaped Michael's life, continued to breathe, watch, and wait for the next unwary soul. Michael's final entry in his chronicle reflected a haunting acceptance. We will never fully understand what lives in the Cascade Mountains. Some forces are beyond us, patient, unseen, and eternal. All we can do is respect the forest, honor those it has claimed, and remember that some mysteries are meant to endure. The forest, indifferent yet sentient, had claimed its story, and it would continue to hold its secrets, patient, watchful, and eternal.